All right, guys, you've been traveling for the last hour and a half or so, trying to figure out your way out of this cornfield. It's been raining hard and through the muck. You managed to finally hit the clearing of the cornfield. As soon as you walk out, you see what looks like maybe 50 feet in front of you a small house on a little hill with about 8 or 9 steps leading up to it. As soon as you hit the clearing, all of a sudden behind you, you hear the crackling and screaming of what sounds like a small child. What are you guys doing?
I'm readying my sword, my dagger.
I placed my mask on.
As soon
And
as you guys do that, you turn to look at that house, and all of a sudden,
Hey yo, it's your boy Ancient Albatross here again with the usual suspects from the Cypher Unlimited crew. We have AD or Alpha Dean, or just simply Dean. We have Spigs18 or Anthony. And Dean, why are we here today?
well, today we are here to specifically talk about the genre of horror. It is October. We're coming up on Halloween. We're going to do our first Twitch stream. So we're going to talk about horror as it relates to the Cypher system. And horror, you know, the definition via the internet and Webster says horror is a genre of fiction or any medium intended to scare, unsettle, and horrify the audience. Historically, the cause of horror experience has often been the intrusion of disturbing supernatural elements into everyday human experience. Since the 1960s, any work of fiction with a morbid, gruesome, surreal, or exceptionally suspenseful and frightening theme has come to be called horror. Horror fiction often overlaps science fiction and or fantasy, comedy, and just about any genre you want to look at. All the categories of which are sometimes placed under the umbrella or classification of speculative fiction. So that's what we're doing. Anthony, why don't we give everybody a breakdown of how we're going to approach this?
all right, so we took the time out today to, we broke down horror into four major categories, with each category having subcategories to them. And I guess we'll talk about the first category, and that would be supernatural horror. And I think the first like subcategory of that, and this is a common horror genre and tropes, is probably possession. And the examples of that would be like The Exorcist, Insidious, Christine, which is a great example. It's a car possessed, and possession could make for really fun horror games.
Right. Especially when you approach it, in the sense of the characters being normal humans without, any abilities or anything to, fight off the possession. It's, based on faith and luck and,
Mhm.
things of that nature. So, possession could really be a good way to instill that, idiom of horror, in the gameplay.
Yeah, and what makes it so terrifying, and it's mentioned in the description, or excuse me, the definition of horror, is that finding yourself in an everyday situation where you're trying to help someone who is sick, but it turns out to be in a supernatural, whatever, possession, and then you have to rely on your everyday skills to deal with this supernatural thing, and kind of scary to think about that happening in real life.
Yeah. Uh, Also, too, is with possession, are the NPCs possessed? Or you using a GM intrusion to temporarily possess a player character? There's a lot of angles you could take with that, which could make for very interesting storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely.
The second subcategory we chose for supernatural horror would be the ghost story, and some examples of that. One of obvious is Poltergeist is a perfect example. The Grudge. I don't know if you guys ever seen that
Oh,
movie,
yeah.
but that's another example of a ghost story. Paranormal Activity, and I think ghosts, not only Cypher System, ghosts are common on most every role playing game. So you could actually have a ghost story or a ghost adventure on many of these subgenres, but it's its own genre in its own right.
Yeah, most
Absolutely.
definitely. Actually, one movie that you didn't mention is actually one of my favorite movies. I actually don't watch horror movies too much, but this one I enjoy quite a lot. It's called Paranormal Activity.
He
Um,
said,
Yeah, I said it.
wait, not Paranormal Activity. Damn, I'm trying to. There's a different movie with a different name. I'm blanking on the name. Never mind. But it's basically a documentary style, shot like within
Oh,
a.
Blair Witch
No,
Project.
no, 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 no. They're like within a like what is it? An abandoned asylum. They're like a mockumentary, so they're doing this pretending they're looking for ghosts, like all for the hype on like a video, like for like a movie or
yeah,
like a
I know
TV
which one you're
show,
talking about.
and then they end up actually finding like a haunted asylum, and they get locked in there, and they can't figure out how to get out. That style of stuff I enjoy quite a lot. Like it really again puts you in that real life headspace. Like, hey, this is happening to them. Like imagine it happening to me. And well, go on.
No, I was gonna say that that's like a perfect example of what you're describing is a perfect one shot.
Yeah. Damn, I'm trying to think of what the name of that movie is. I'll think of
It may have been
it.
called The Asylum.
No, it definitely wasn't.
Hmm. But I do know I've seen a
Grave
couple.
Encounters.
Grave Encounters,
Grave
right?
Encounters is the name of the movie.
You screamed
Now,
at me.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I just got excited that I remembered. But yeah, so in that movie, you follow a group of people who are pretending they're looking for ghosts, like just for the hype. They just pick like a spooky location,
Oh, I've never seen that. I
and
gotta
they
check that
end
out.
up getting locked in the actual asylum and having to deal with an actual possession situation or a ghost situation. Um,
and just let me give a quick disclaimer to everybody too, just so everybody understands. We're basically referencing a lot of movies. We're probably going to reference mostly movies, only because we're talking about the Cypher system, which has a grand cinematic styling, in the storytelling and everything else. So, we're giving you this, from that perspective, so you can get the idea of the visuals and what type of descriptors and descriptions you should actually use throughout your game, because that's what doing a horror game is really. It's really about the smoke and mirrors. It's really about the atmosphere and the setting. So we're using movies so you can go back and reference these things in order to better get that imagery, to get that story across. um
And I mean, I'm glad you actually brought that up because these subcategories and these categories, none of this is etched in stone. I literally wrote this at work. Don't tell my boss today. So it's basically four categories that we wrote out, and we thought it was the best way to explain. And the references, like Dean said, are mostly films because I think that's something that's more common that most people might have either seen or actually heard of these films, as opposed to if we used other forms of entertainment like novels and such. So we chose to go to film, like, because quite honestly, it was kind of the most convenient for me as I was writing it.
and here, the other thing we can do, if you're interested, is we can always throw at the bottom, we can throw down the reference list of the films and stuff that we talk about in the video today as well.
like IMDb
um
links or something.
Yeah.
because it would be really good, if you're going to start doing a horror game, or if you want to run like a long standing or a long running horror film, I mean horror adventure, then you might want to look at some of the television series that fall into those same categories, um as as we move forward. So and if you
Uh,
want to think about that, like for Possession, look at the TV show Sleepy Hollow. For Ghost Stories, there were a couple of TV shows. There was one called uh, Lake, the Lake, and there was another one. I'll come up with them, but we'll have a list of things at the bottom, at the end of the video.
the next subcategory for supernatural is demons and devils. And the most obvious one for this, I think that fits into this category, is any of the Lovecraft novels, particularly any of the Cthulhu series.
Yes.
Would be a perfect example. For a film, a good one would be Rosemary's Baby. I don't know if anyone's seen that. And Evil Dead, the first one, is a perfect example of demons and devils.
And there's another movie from the 1970s. It was called The Devil's Reign, starring Ernest Borgnine.
Yep.
It was a cult who worshiped the devil,
Mhm.
and bringing the devil into the world. So anything like that. And when you start looking at demons and devils, again, let's be let's be cognitive that these things can border on, situational things and can cause probably trauma for some people because some people are religious or whatever the case may be. So these are all things that we need to take into account, as we move forward. Because the biggest thing with, with this stuff is that there can be always some sort of weird triggers or, anything with that.
Yeah, we definitely gonna talk about consent later on in this video, like towards when we start actually giving advice on how to run horror games.
But it's
Um,
always something to important
yeah.
to keep in the back of your
Oh no,
mind when approaching any
absolutely.
topic.
I think this is the Dean brought up a great point that this is the first of many. I think we're gonna touch on with horror that this is very triggering to a lot of people, and I Dean's 100% correct that
Yep.
you know, especially when not only religious people, but possession can actually fall under that category as well.
Yep.
But with horror games, you're gonna come across a lot of triggering aspects. It's just the nature of the genre. We'll later get on to some other categories that are not necessarily as triggering, but unfortunately, with horror games, it is what it is. We're gonna hit some games that are not necessarily for everyone.
Most definitely. But
And
again,
we
just
have to be respectful and recognize that fact, and respect everyone's opinion and respect everyone's right to refusal.
Yep.
Absolutely.
The last thing I put in for supernatural horror, I put in supernatural powers, and what I mean by that is stories like Carrie, Stephen King's Carrie. Scanners. I don't know if you guys ever saw that movie. That's a phenomenal movie if you haven't.
David
And
Cronenberg.
yeah, Sixth Sense. It's another good example of it has supernatural elements, but the players are either the players or a specific character in the narrative is empowered by some sort of supernatural ability.
And those are always fun because again, you're in that real life situation, but depending on the excuse me, the how the GM is letting players make their characters in a session, you might have some superpower, some special hidden latent ability, and when you're playing a role playing game, that's always fun. You don't always want to be the super helpless human in the everyday situation where something way out of your control is happening. Don't get me wrong; those can be fun as well because that's why horror is fun. You always wanna, not always wanna, but it is fun to have that rush of adrenaline from feeling helpless, like overcoming the odds, etc. But there's the other side of the coin when you can have the power to deal with these supernatural whatever threats. It's always nice to feel not so helpless.
The in this particular category, this particular subcategory also is for me kind of one of my favorites because in some respects you can make it less horror and more intrigue because you can go the route of things like the X-Files and things like that where there may be a shadow government or conspiracy or something like that, that somebody's trying to exploit the person with powers and stuff like that. So there's still that level, but then you can always throw in a dark twist, that there's something even more insidious than, the shadow government, that, there's truly a supernatural power, that's trying to manipulate everything as well. So you have options actually you have options with all horror, but this particular subcategory of the supernatural aspect is kind of cool. At least for me, that's how I.
I mean, I love the way you described it because, it's a lot easier to have those lighter moments in this type of horror game because of the way that the subcategory is designed. And you're absolutely right. I think this is probably also one of my favorite out of the horror genre. And you could touch on a lot of the other categories with this subgenre in particular because it's a little more open and not as narrow focus as some of the other subgenres are. Al, do you want to hit the second major category?
All right, so next one we got on the list here, and again we break this major broad topic down into a bunch of others. Is psychological horror. And you know, that's always intense. Don't really have too much experience watching. Oh, actually, I have seen the first one mentioned here. So in the first subcategory of psychological horror, we have children doing horrible things, such as The Ring, Children of the Corn, The Omen. I'm sure there's many others, but I actually have seen The Ring. And yeah, that is a child doing something terrible to people.
One of the worst movies is another one from the '70s that it probably traumatized me a little bit when I watched it. It was called The Brood.
Oh,
Oh,
you remember Village of the Dam from this?
Village of the Damned,
Oh,
yeah. But
no,
The Brood, the Brood was the one that messed my day up, man.
your guys know that this is my this is my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
I love psychological horror. I love children are scary as shit. I'm sorry, I'm saying there's just something about the innocence, you know,
Well,
and
that's what I'm trying to say. If you guys ever watched The Brood, now Al, you love Pink. Just imagine two little kids, you know, under 3 feet tall,
Yeah.
walking down the street in snowsuits, and then when they turn around, you know, they got fangs and hammers. It proceeds. It's just not a good picture.
you know, my Gods of the Fall one shot had the imagery of the teenage girls floating on the walls, face first. You know, there's something about innocence and evil meshing together that just freaks me out, and I think it freaks a lot of other people out. You
Well,
know,
that's the
and
point. I was just saying that's the point of it.
yeah.
You hit the nail on the head because it's I think what you're getting to is that innocence and then the evil. So it's the evil exploiting the innocence.
So one really good example of this, and this is one I actually know, even though I don't think I've seen the movie, is in The Shining, where the two little girls are at the end of the hallway. It's the perfect mix mash of innocence and evil. You have two little innocent looking girls, but you know there's something off about the whole thing. I honestly don't know the full scene, like what crazy stuff might happen. I forget if they reappear down other hallways or whatever have you. But just seeing even just the still image of two little girls down a narrow hallway with nothing else but just them two there holding hands, just looking straight away. Even that alone is.
Well, you see that's the beauty of it. You know, with like children doing horrible things type of horror, right? You don't need the gore. You don't need the graphic violence. You don't need any of those major triggering, you know, aspects to creep the crap out of somebody. You know, it's just the imagery of, you know, the motionless child, the expressionless child that creates that, you know, that fear atmosphere for you.
It's
You know,
very
and-
unnerving.
Yes, and it's I really appreciate it because you could, it's very easy to eliminate, you know, some of the violence out of your horror game and still have that effect, still create you know, that atmosphere of fear. So you know, I really appreciate this genre.
Yep, most definitely. Oh, did you have something to say, Dean? Before we
No,
move
no,
on?
go ahead. No, we're ready for you to go for the next one.
All right. So the next one on the list is something I can actually talk about a tiny little bit. Is serial killer psychological horror, such as Halloween, Friday the 13th, Silence of the Lambs, so on and so forth. And in this one, it's more about that. I mean, I've never seen Silence of the Lambs, so I don't really know the tropes of that one. But with like Friday the 13th, Halloween, it's that fear of that threat that's ever always coming, no matter what, how much distance you put between them, what you do to them. They're just constantly a threat that's there. And there's never, like, the whole point of that, or the whole selling point of that horror is there's never any time for relaxing. There's always tension, always suspense, and that makes for a fantastic game, which I've actually done one of. I don't really touch the horror genre too much, but I actually did touch on this one. For what is it? It was like a teens who go camping, like summer camping or at winter camping. I decide randomly at the beginning of the game. But they go camping out in the woods, and then a serial killer is like on the loose killing people, and they get warned about it prior, and then they still go camping and blah blah blah. But the whole thing is like there's this threat looming on the horizon for the whole time. They see like little hints of him here and there, but they don't really see him until like the climax of the story, and just that element of tense and suspension can keep a game driving pretty forward as long as you dangled that danger just outside of their vision, and you're good about placing those like little seeds here and there of like, oh, he was here, or he might be here, or whatever. It can really put people on edge, and it creates just a dynamite game.
And for me, I'll touch on like Silence of the Lambs and one that Anthony didn't put up there, but Saw, things like that. These are different. They're different in the sense that the villain.
I did put Saw, but it's under a different category.
Oh, okay. Well, oh yeah, I see where you saw it. Yeah, I see it now. But Saw could fall under both categories. Yeah. Silence of the Lamb could kind of fall under both categories as well.
Yeah.
But the idea with what I was saying is that the danger is unknown. It's an unknown factor. Or the villain is so unassuming. Nobody. When you see, if you ever watch, Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Lecter doesn't look like the villain. He's the guy next door. He's the guy you go borrow a cup of sugar from. And then for Saw, again, he's not the villain that you're expecting. So it's those aspects where you're going into a situation and you really don't know what to expect because the villain isn't outright. Friday the 13th, Halloween, Freddy Krueger, all of those guys, exactly, that's the bad guy. Here you're just like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, you see, I don't necessarily think that's serial killer. When I think of serial killer, I think of you're never safe, no matter how far you get away. Maybe I misphrased it, but to me, serial killer is like slasher. Like you're never, no matter how far you run, the killer is always one step ahead of you. And I think that Cypher System does this very well because the GM intrusion mechanic is actually perfect for this style of game.
So you thought you were safe?
Yeah, I have a GM intrusion for you. The car didn't start, or you finally jump in the car, and then it doesn't turn over, and you notice that the battery is missing. It's
right.
that. It's that slasher film mentality, and those characters are never truly safe. It's not more so like I don't know if I would put Freddy Krueger in this category. Freddy Krueger might be a little more supernatural than me. I think this is more, like Michael Myers or Jason. They more realistic to me. Like they could actually, like these people could actually be chasing you.
Well, I mean, but they always added a supernatural element to those guys. And you remember, Freddy Krueger started out as just a serial killer until.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like what you said. It's hard to put one film. Like one film could be in 6 different categories. So right. I was trying to fit them into what I felt was the closest.
Well, no, and you hit the nails on the head. I'm just saying those guys all work in the same vein to me. They're like you said, they're always. Even with Freddy Krueger, it's the same thing. I mean, he comes through your dreams, but he's always one step ahead of you.
Yeah, and the reason why I put Silence of the Lambs, and maybe I should have rethought that one after I heard your description, but the reason why I put Silence of the Lambs in there is because he was always one step ahead of everyone. Like he out. So she thought she had all the answers, but he was really pulling the strings.
Right. He was a manipulator. And that's another thing that we can build on in a horror game using GM intrusions.
Yeah.
So, that's huge.
Al?
So next one we got on the list here is psychotic people. So like Psycho, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Shining. I might be wrong on the name here, but American Psycho would fall into this too with what's his face.
Yeah.
What's his? I'm blanking on his name.
He
Christian
Bale.
Bale. Christian Bale.
he can actually fall on both categories, serial killer as well.
Yeah, but
Yeah, yeah.
in this one, it's again you're in this everyday situation, but this unassuming person has this side of them that you're not really fully aware of until things hit a wall or a peak or whatever have you in the story. It's always hiding just underneath, and just the scary aspect of that is it can have that in an everyday scenario. Like you don't know, like you could be on an elevator with one guy. You don't know if that guy is a psychotic person who might just switch off and kill you for like his own pleasure or whatever have you. And that's really what this shows. This genre shows is that even in everyday situations, you might not necessarily be safe, even from just regular everyday happenstance. There's nothing supernatural going on here. They're just crazy people.
Yeah, and the difference between this and a serial killer, is Jason's. Michael Myers is a perfect example. He's gonna follow you motionless, soundless. You turn around, he's there. He's gonna slit your throat. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, he's gonna bust down your door with a chainsaw. Everyone's gonna hear it. Everyone's gonna hear you scream. It's I don't care. I'm just a killing machine, or I'm a family of killers. There is no there's no reasoning with them. There's no. You could definitely outsmart them, but it's a different type of. I'm gonna kill you at all costs.
Normally, but also you said it right. You said psychotic people. So normally, they're not alone.
Yeah.
Normally, it's more than one.
I should have put The Hills Have Eyes on this.
The Hills Have Eyes. I was going to mention that. I was also going to mention Wrong Turn. Those movies. You think, and sometimes it's even crazy too, because there's always, because we've watched so many of these movies, because we enjoy the genre. I watch everything. I watch from horror, comedy, drama, you name it. I watch it, and you get to the point where, certain characters, the nice guy, he looks normal, and he's like he's the wolf in sheep's clothing. It's always that guy, or it's the grandmother that you think is gonna help you. Oh, Mrs. Jenkins, thank you for opening the door. Pop, she hits you with a hammer.
You know what's another perfect example for this category too? Deliverance.
Yeah.
Deliverance has the psychological horror, but it doesn't have the gore. But they still crazy people. They just crazy. I don't know if you ever seen Deliverance. It's about a guy's. There's about a group of guys that are whitewater rafting in West Virginia.
I kind of know the premise, and they get caught up with some crazy Southern people or whatever have you, and there's some wildness that goes on that I don't want to describe. I think I know one of the major scenes from that one that would be quite traumatizing to describe.
It was quite traumatizing.
I'm not gonna
just put it like this. It would definitely get the X card in a role playing game.
Yeah, most definitely. Absolutely. But either way, it definitely. This genre definitely hits close to home for most people who are spooked of scary horror genre things.
And just like Dean said, a lot of these genres are that's why they're in the same category. A lot of these movies and TV shows that we referencing actually fit into several of these categories.
And the other thing about this one that makes it that much more frightening is because you could actually imagine this happening. I know people right now who, when they come home, every lock is on the door. Click, 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 click. I got a security system. They checking the doors and windows 14 times, because, they've been spooked.
Actually, Dean, this is the most realistic of all the categories. Not only can you imagine that these things are happening, these things
do happen.
They have
actually happened, which is nuts.
Psycho and Texas Chainsaw Massacre is actually based on
real stories,
and it's based on the same story. It's just twice.
That's crazy. But I think we can move on to the next subcategory. So next one we got on here is animals and nature. So like the birds, Jaws, Cujo. I believe Pet Cemetery would also fall under this one.
Sort of.
I mean,
Yeah.
I've never
sorta.
seen it, but
Nah, the animals are not attacking a pet cemetery. It's about the pet. It's people burying human beings that come back to life.
gotcha. Okay, never mind. Then I thought it was about zombie animals. See, this is how
Man.
shouldn't I have a non-movie buff talking about movies? But either way, in this subgenre or what a subcategory, it's about being spooked or having the being in a scary situation that involves animals, which again is kind of like the children in horror, where it's like something innocent turning into something very scary or dangerous, such as it becomes menacing or whatever. What were we gonna say, Dean?
No, just saying, absolutely. The animal nature. There were some movies, that touched on things like there was a couple environmental movies from the 80s, and 70s, and 80s. One called The Prophecy, where it was a mutant bear that basically had been grafted with other animals from nature because people were doing throwing chemicals and crap into the water. And then there was Food of the Gods. It was actually based on an H.G. Wells book, where they supersized rats and wasps and things like this. So,
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of movies. Ben is another perfect example. Horror movies is like one of my passions, so it was really difficult for me to narrow down this list. Food of the Gods is one I should have put in there. That was definitely a great example of a film that should have been on this list. But it's like what Al said, it's similar to children. There's something about like human nature or just the human psyche of something that's normalized, like a pet. Cujo's a perfect example of what normally you would normally go, oh, isn't that adorable? But now it's out to kill me.
Or the birds. Think about it. People feed birds all the time, and you're sitting in the park, and the next thing you know, a swarm of birds, a flock of birds.
It's just scary, and I think this is a topic, a style of game that I possibly want to explore at some time. This is a very subgenre that I kind of want to dabble in.
And another thing that makes it scary is the fact that no one wants to fight like a dog. No one wants to fight a flock of birds. Like how often do you find yourself in a situation where you have to defend yourself from 20 crows or whatever? Like
and another, for Cypher purposes, you get to abuse the swarm mechanic.
Yes, exactly. And
Exactly.
but the thing is, like, it's just such a bewildering situation to find yourself in that most people just, if it happened in real life, just really wouldn't know how to cope or what to do. Like, that's what makes it so scary.
Yeah. You want to do the last one on this list?
I don't know if you guys had anything else to say about this, but if you're moving on to the last one we have for this section is body horror. So like Saw, the Human Centipede, Hostel. We talked about Saw being in the serial killer or the psychotic people section. I forget exactly where we mentioned Saw.
Killers, psychotic, yeah.
But
and I was just going to address that real quick. The reason why I put Saw, Dean's absolutely right that Saw could have been in multiple of these categories. But the reason why I put Saw in this category, because when I saw the Saw films, what I felt was the frightening thing. It wasn't what Jigsaw was doing to the people, is what he was forcing them to do to themselves. Mutilating their own bodies in order to try to escape. And that's why I put it in the body horror category. But Dean's absolutely right. It could have easily been in the serial killer category.
Well, again, it's just perspective, and you because you're absolutely right. It fits into body horror. I was coming at it from the perspective of the Jigsaw being the antagonist.
Yeah.
And you're coming at it from the perspective of what the people are going through. What we witness. So it works.
Yeah, I was looking at it from a viewer or from a narrative perspective is where's the fear coming from? Like what what how are they getting you scared as a viewer?
Which
Or
again makes a lot. Again, I don't watch many movies, but I have
good,
seen a couple of the Saw ones. Not many
good.
of them, mind you, but I definitely have seen the first one a couple times. And again, what Anthony is saying, that is what drives the fear in these. I mean, aside from the fact that anybody could be kidnapped and put into a situation like this, no matter how contrived his traps are or whatever, like it might be very, very difficult for one person to, or I forget what the story is, if it's him or working with somebody. Spoiler alert, he might be working with somebody, I don't know. But either way, it's so elaborate, but even then, like, a very determined person could do this. It is something that could happen, which that is like more of a secondary thing because it is very outlandish to think of that happening, but it is a possibility. But the true
Okay, you can finish what you
no,
said.
I was gonna say the true real fear comes from what they actually have to go through once they're in the situation.
Yeah.
It's you saw the face I was making earlier. If you're looking at her face, it's rough. It's
Well,
very rough.
I think body horror as a genre in whole is you need a select group of players. You know, the mutilation of flesh and like there's a lot of films that could fit into this category. I could Alter States, well, Hellraiser could possibly fit in this.
Oh yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's
Here's the
it's a
deal.
very triggering style of gameplay.
Here's the deal. You said the magic words. You said that it takes a very special group, and I would think it would also take probably a group of people who know each other. You
Most
know,
likely, yes.
um, you know, body horror, like you said, it is, and sometimes they cross lines. Prime example will be the Human Centipede. I've watched the movie,
The
um,
the
and it's
Yeah, it's horrible. But the
yeah,
reason why I put it on there is because I'm a big horror fan. I watch a ton of horror movies, like similar to how Dean is with kung fu movies. I'm really I study horror films, and when you think of body horror, that's like one of the first films that
absolutely.
come up.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just it. I mean,
It's
you
not an
know,
enjoyable film to watch, though.
no, it really isn't. And see, I think that's the biggest thing because I want to be, a good storyteller, a good GM when I come to the table. Um, I take all my experiences from books, movies. I watch everything, like I said before. Yeah, you're right. Kung fu movies and like sci-fi and superheroes, those are like my babies. Those are things that I will watch over and over again and can dialogue it out. Like I know all the lines to The Last Dragon. That's
Yeah.
like a guilty pleasure favorite movie. But getting back to the horror, you're right. And sometimes, if that's something you're into, if this is what you want to do as far as a GM, it's good to sometimes make yourself uncomfortable because then it's easier to relate to the uncomfortability of players coming in. You would, so I think it would make you a better GM and a more empathetic person at GM as well.
And
Most definitely.
there's another one that I didn't put on this list purposely, but I'll mention it. But I don't personally, I don't think there's really any room for it in role playing games. But I'll mention it just for the sake of being honest to the list. On the psychological horror, if we were dealing with erotic horror, would either be onto this list and like necromaniac and stuff like that. But I personally, the reason why I didn't put it on this list is I personally don't think will be enjoyable to anyone in the role playing game, or at least anyone that I game with. But I just say, out of respect for the genre, I just thought I'd mention it.
All right, excellent.
All right.
Dean, you want to go into the next?
So the next group we go into is monster horror, and monster horror is massive in its possibilities and
Yeah,
capabilities.
I could have had a million subcategories.
Yeah,
of
we could
this.
add a million, but we're just going to try to touch on the most common, most popular, if you will. And we're going to start out with zombies. Movies like Dawn of the Dead, I Am Legend, 28 Weeks Later. And I'm going to say this about zombies. Zombies can come in so many different forms. You've got science zombies. You've got, zombies because of supernatural reasons. You've got, genetic zombies. It's such a broad category. Um,
Oh,
and I'm just gonna say, zombies to me is a great. Um, it's a great one to play where everybody is kind of a mundane person because you do have power. The things the thing. You know what? I got a gun. I got a sledgehammer. I got an axe. So you feel empowered, but it's still scary because a horde of zombies, coming towards the Intrepid, I still have nightmares.
and even in a situation where it's not a horde of zombies, if it's just, well, let's say we find yourself in a 1v1 situation with a zombie, that's still even if it's, again, you're in a universe where a zombie is slow moving or whatever have you, it can still be very scary because one mistake and that could be it.
Right.
One failed dice roll and that might be it for you, depending on how your GM is running it.
Once again, you guys know there's no secret. I absolutely love zombie films. I love zombie games. The one thing I like about zombies in the horror genre is it's a perfect one shot. It's a perfect campaign. This is one of the zombies. They work in a long running game. They work in a great one shot. The great thing about zombie games is that this is for a lot of the horror genre in particular, but specifically for zombie games, is you can't really win in this scenario. This scenario is about surviving. It's about doing enough to stay alive,
Right.
or possibly finding a safe zone. And just that fear is, it's so easy to add tension into zombie games. It's just fun to play. It's fun to run.
Yeah,
It's one of,
sorry.
I was gonna say it's one of my favorite horror games to play.
I definitely feel like that too. Even though I've only think I've ever played in your zombie games, but just zombie games in general, like what is it, Left 4 Dead? That's a super fun zombie game. And just the fact that, again, if you look across the zombie genre, the zombies they can take on so many forms, like you guys are saying, and it gives you so many options to drop zombies in almost any setting or genre you have. You can have fantasy zombies, you can have sci-fi zombies, they literally fit anywhere. They can be the cause just has to fit the setting, like why are there zombies, but maybe a virus mutated, maybe a necromancer cast a spell over the town or whatever. Like there's always, regardless of the setting, there's a way to fit them in.
And every genre, like you said, not only horror.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
So moving on, probably one of my favorite, not my absolute favorite as far as monsters are concerned. We're going to get there because Anthony did put it on the list, which I'm happy about. But vampires are our next. Movies like The Lost Boys, of course, classic Dracula. Dracula's been done how many times and how many ways. Near Dark, which was a little bit more of a gritty,
love that. I just love that whole take.
Near Dark is great.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't like it, but I thought 30 Days of Night was brilliant, as a movie, but as a comic as well. So vampires, what's not to dig about, you've got vampires come in varying degrees too. They from the sensual, erotic, fantasy vampire to the savage, monstrosity, and it's, vampires are just fun as well. They're I think they fall just like zombies, because how do you get away?
I think the way vampires are maybe more special than zombies is that vampires is one of these monsters that you could play both sides of the fence. You could play the vampires and do the whole, Vampire the Masquerade, one of the greatest and biggest games of all time. Or you could play the people running or hunting the vampires.
Or you could play the people running from the vampires.
Yeah. And it's also similar to zombies where it's a one shot, it's a campaign. There's a lot you could do with vampires. That's why it's included in almost every role-playing game you ever find. I don't think there is a role-playing game, that Monster Manual, that doesn't have vampires in it.
And Anthony did not mention one vampire movie that I think should be on here. very specifically because again, it shows you how vampires don't always have to be.
Don't say
Uh,
vampire in Brooklyn.
no, 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 no. I would never say that. No,
I should have put
life,
that in the comedy list.
actually, Life Force. I don't know if you
Oh
remember.
yeah, oh yeah, with the
because
comment. Yeah.
because Life Force showed was kind of a sci-fi-ish version of how the legend of zombies came about. You
Mm.
know, these creatures, you know, it wasn't wood, it was cold iron, cold wrought iron was their weakness, and they were energy vampires. They
Yeah.
literally sucked your life force out as opposed to biting you and drinking your blood.
I love the fact that they came with Haley's Comet, so it was every 70 something years. That's
Right.
like Life Force is one of my favorite movies of all time. I love
You
it.
know, and then of course, we can go a little bit even further to the sci-fi edge with the vampires. Um, Old TV show Buck Rogers in the 25th century, they introduced the Vorvon, and the Vorvon was a psychic vampire. He fed on your emotions. You
Mm.
know, the more intense the emotion, the better the feed was. So, vampires can be done in a plethora of ways as well.
And
So,
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, I'm good.
No, and coming from the perspective of someone who really doesn't know too much about the genre, like I haven't really watched many vampire things or read many vampire books or whatever have you, so I don't think I could particularly run a good vampire game, but the appeal as a player is, again, you know that vampires are basically immortal, they live forever, not many things can hurt them, so it becomes about resource management in this sort of situation where you're trying to get and keep or have it on hand, the thing that hurts them, whether it be the iron or whatever you said for the those space ones, or whether it be silver bullets or whatever have you. You're gonna always want to have that in supply, and you can create a really panicky situation where the players lose that or something, or there's a lot of ways to play with being in a vampire game, and as a player knowing that there's a vampire as the big bad guy or something like that, or even as common enemies. It's a lot of fun because you have to worry in the same way as what is it, zombies. You have to worry about your personal being because they feed off you essentially. So you always have to worry about, hey, they're gonna eat me, blah blah blah. And again, there's always that level of tension because basically everything you do to stop them doesn't really work unless you do it in a very specific way.
Right. To counteract what you just said, the beauty of vampires is that there's so many references and resources to look up vampires. Like Dean just gave you, off the top of his head, like 5 examples. There's so much literature out there. There's so much TV shows, movies. It's so easy to research vampires.
Right.
So it's a common baddie, and it's a common element to be the major character arc in your narrative. So it's it's there's a ton of references to if you wanted to do a vampire game.
And a quick add on to what Anthony was just saying, not only is there lots of material out there for you, but again, that variety, because every culture has their legends of vampires and they're all distinctly different. Everybody's familiar with the European vampire, like I said, the manipulator, the good looking, the ones who you stake them through the heart with a piece of wood, and they mesmerize you and so on and so forth. But there's African vampires. The African vampires are totally different, and they're very frightening. I'm not going to even tell people about them because you know what, that's a whole nother dissertation. But just putting it out there, go look up other cultural ideas of vampires. That alone will seed your game with something different, and that also gives you something to play with, because what, people think I'm playing a vampire game. Okay, I know what I need: holy water, I need crucifixes. You pull out this vampire that likes religious artifacts that draws them. So yeah, it's so much stuff out there.
Most
So-
definitely.
And if you guys don't have nothing else, I'm going to move on
Yep.
to the next category.
Yep.
All right. So the next category we have under horror, under monster horror, a lot of people probably don't even consider it horror because of the spectacle and everything of it. But it is still horror because, hey, who amongst us can truly deal with a giant monster? you know, Jurassic Park, Cloverfield, you know, my all-time favorite King of the Monsters. I don't care what anybody says, Godzilla. Forget King Kong. Godzilla is the ish, you know.
And if you watch the original Godzilla, he was a bad guy. He wasn't
The first, yes, in the
yeah,
first
yeah.
Godzilla movie, the
He was
1951 movie,
he
he
was a
was the bad
legitimate
guy.
monster. Yeah.
But as a caveat, he was the bad guy, but technically he wasn't. He was actually just a vehicle to speak about the atrocities of nuclear war. That's really what it was. And that you know, so they made him a bad guy, but not.
You sound like a Godzilla fanboy.
I am a Godzilla fanboy. I'm not.
He
Hey,
was killing people in the first film.
Godzilla kills people in every film. But still, you know, that's because you were stupid enough to stay in Tokyo too long.
I'm just teasing you, but you know, I had to put Godzilla in there because, like you know, like you, I grew up watching him, and he is a horror character. You know,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like people may not think that's horror, but if you know, Godzilla might be the extreme, but there's a ton of other you know giant monsters that terrorize cities. You know,
and the fun thing about this genre is, again, you can play like everyday situation where you're just trying to run and survive or whatever have you, or find the mechanism or whatever to defeat this giant thing, whether it be alerting the army or you know finding your own ways to do it. It also fits very well in the fantasy sort of sci-fi spectrum, where it could be like what is it, like Pacific Rim or any giant mech or kaiju setting where it's not super horror because you can deal with it, but it is a way to play with, because if you're away from your giant mech, then that's super scary. Like there'll definitely be situations where you're gonna have to deal with stuff outside of your giant safety, the safety of your vehicle. And in those situations, yeah, it's definitely, you have a horror element in your action game.
Yeah.
So yeah, that I think that's a pretty good take on the giant monsters, because we could talk about them for a while too. And we'll slide on into another one, you know, that, you know, a lot of people, I guess a lot of people don't look at it as horror, but, you know, when you name these particular movies, you can definitely see the horror in it, and that's Aliens. You know, so The Thing, of course, Alien, the original Alien, Extra, very much, very, very scary. You know, The Thing, you know, especially John Carpenter's version, was phenomenal. And, you know, just the fact that you never knew who the monster was, who the alien was, you know, throughout the film was just nail biting, you know.
You know, like I think the difference between Alien and Supernatural is they have very similar elements, but with Alien monster movies is, you know, it came from outer space. You know, The Blob would be another example. You know that it's some outer worldly, you know,
otherworldly creation, right?
Yeah, coming to, you know, destroy humanity.
And the thing that drives this what is a subcategory of horror is you I don't know, I don't want to have a full on blown on discussion about this, but I don't know if we're the only intelligent life out there. Like as a kid growing up, when I was young, very young, probably like anywhere between the ages of like 8 and 12, I would actually, like, when I would like turn off the TV or whatever, get ready for bed, I would just sit there like scared, like, yo, what if an alien came through the window right now? Like, what if an alien just came down the stairs right now? Like, I'll just stare at the like dark corner of the room and just like, what if an alien came downstairs right now? Like, what would I do? Like, then that is the scary element. Like, what would you do if, like, you're a part of an abduction situation? Like, it's just scary to find yourself in the presence of this like entity you don't understand.
That's a fear in its own right, abduction. You know, the being experimented on. It's, you know,
even if it's not aliens.
Yeah.
But still, yes, that was something I went through as a kid.
Right. You know, and those are all like you know, real things, you know, real fears, if you will. So I mean, there was a movie, I think it was in 1980, it came out, it was called The Dark. And that was to me one of the best alien horror movies ever because there was really no explanation. All you saw at the beginning of the movie was a meteor hit the ground, and the next thing you know, this dude start walking around, shooting lasers out his eyes and pulling people's heads off. But it always happened. It was just wild. It was a great movie, So, and you know what? And here we come. I'm actually going to save my favorite for the last. I'm going to go to the next category. And the next category is classic or mythological. So, things like Gremlins, Frankenstein, Leprechaun, those things, that live in the lexicon of our history or our folklore and things like that. These movies are great. Gremlins, people consider it a comedy in some respects, but it had comical elements, but the whole concept, of what a gremlin is, and they kind of flipped it on its ear. Leprechaun, definitely great, film because it turned the happy-go-lucky Lucky Charms guy into something relatively scary, and one of my personal favorites was the movie Grimm Fairy Tales, where they literally told you what the real Grimm Fairy Tales were like, because they weren't all happy and nice, they were twisted and dark. So
a lot of the Frankenstein, the Mummy, there's a lot of films and literature that you could put in this. The reason why I put classic and mythological together, it's the stuff that someone that doesn't necessarily watch horror movies or watch a lot of media, I'm looking at you, Al, would still recognize what this is without actually, like Al may have never watched any horror films, but if I told him Frankenstein, he would be aware of it. If I told him Leprechaun or The Mummy, he would be aware of it. Mm-hmm. And all those films, they have comedic elements or they have serious versions. It's how someone takes this mythological figure, and some of them take it in horror directions. So I created a category for that.
That really makes sense. I have not seen many of these movies, but I have seen clips of them, like Leprechaun, who wants to be running away from us. The little costume that guy has or whatever. It's a sight.
The whole purpose of this list is to spark ideas for gaming. Like, you don't have to follow any of these. Like, any of these, like I said, any of these categories are not etched in stone. And if you disagree with the order or the way the characters are set up, put it in the comment section, because I literally wrote this at work. So we needed some sort of like framework, and this is what I came up with.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Dean, on to your favorites.
My favorites of all times when it comes to the monster horror are werewolves or lichens. The shapeshifter that's in touch with your primal side. That whole thing. I just dig it. Anthony just put up American Werewolf in London, The Wolf in Red Riding Hood, but there are a few others that fall in that category. There's tons of others that fall in that category, but The Howling is probably one of the best werewolves.
Let me give you a piece of my mind.
Exactly. Or my favorite line in that movie is,
"Oh, you got to watch The Howling, Al. That's a
listen, because my favorite line is silver bullets." It's great. Another one that kind of falls in this category is oh my God, the one with Malcolm McDowell and the
Cat People.
Cat People. Right. Yeah. Cat People was another one that falls in that category for me. Sleepwalkers.
Cat People would fall under erotic horror.
That too.
If I had to put it in there.
Well, it would definitely, but it still had. Yeah, it was, but it still had the basically those transforming from one form to another.
Great film. It's a great film.
But to me, there's always been something cool about that. Even Anthony brought up Vampire the Masquerade. We go in the World of Darkness. There was Werewolf the Apocalypse. That those two were the best selling of the World of Darkness stuff, and probably had the most additional supplements and everything else. And like I said, I just dig the whole werewolf or
I mean,
being changed under the auspice.
But yeah, werewolves are definitely a fun concept to play around, especially if you have a game where you can play as a werewolf. Because
it falls in the same group as vampires.
Yeah, exactly. It's always fun to be able to transform into something more mystical or strong or whatever have you.
And I was going to say, like with vampires, it's families, and with werewolves, it's packs. It's a different sort of dynamic, So yeah, it's one of the genres that you could go the action adventure route and play the werewolves, or you could go the horror route and be hunted by werewolves.
Exactly. Or you could be, and again, like you said, or you could be a werewolf hunter.
Yeah.
I.e. Monster Hunter. I think we should run a Monster Hunter game, guys.
Yeah. So does that end the monster section?
That ends the monster section. So
and
take us away.
This is the last category. I'm not so sure about this category. It was probably like 30 minutes before I had to leave work, and I wanted to put 4 categories in. So if I got this one totally screwed up, just let me know in the comment section below. But I could have went a lot of different directions, but I went with comedy and action adventure horror, right? And I broke it down into 3 subcategories. One is comedy horror. Examples would be like Army of Darkness, Shaun of the Dead, The Cooties, Stand Against Evil,
Zombieland.
Zombieland, that's a good one.
Zombieland's another good example. But this is basically beer and pretzels horror game. So is it really a horror game, or it's tongue-in-cheek horror with gory elements? It's fun to play, and not for nothing, most serious horror games start out being serious, but halfway 2 hours in become comedy horror anyway. So I thought I'd put it in there.
It's definitely
or vice versa. There's sometimes that you start out with a fun game, funny, and it turns into absolute horror.
Yeah,
but it's definitely very fun to play around in a very scary setting, but still have that lighthearted side to it where you're cracking jokes as you're killing the zombies. Like you maybe hit a zombie with a golf club before and you knock their head off or whatever. Things like that.
It depends, because I've played with some people that they don't like to mix their chocolate with their peanut butter at all. And D knows what I'm talking about. I'm running a serious horror game, and if you even smile, this guy's not taking it serious enough.
Yeah.
There are definitely 2 sides to that coin. You are correct. But personally, I enjoy dipping my peanut butter in chocolate.
Well, like I said, I think for all of us, because we've gamed for so long, Al, you just starting out, but I think I told you, you're a natural. I think, realizing that there can be some levity in no matter what kind of game you're running is okay. Because sometimes, prime example, when I ran the game, the Shadows game, where it was a version of the Mist, instead of a mist coming in, it was darkness. And Kenny's character, exactly. See, and he wasn't playing his character to be funny. He just was.
That was just the character.
Yeah, the character just turned out to be funny because, and through the whole game, if you remember correctly, he was funny because his character truly never really saw the supernatural things happening. He always came in on aftermath or something, so it was just perfect. It was tongue-in-cheek right up into the end.
But if you look at most action horror, because that's what he was going for with that game, they have the comic relief guy.
Yeah.
If you look at most action horror films, even the most bloodiest and serious of films, there's always that one moment where there's a character that just says something that makes you laugh.
Game over, man. Game over.
But
the next, I guess, unless you want to
no,
continue on with comedy horror, the next one is the action adventure horror, And these are the most common: Aliens, Mars Attacks, Predator, Terminator. They have horror elements, but that's not really what drives the narrative. What drives the narrative is the action of either combating or running away from whatever this horror element is. Terminator is a perfect example. If you really, Terminator at its core, it's really a horror movie, but that's not what you pay attention to. You pay attention to the explosions and the fireworks
and the gunfights.
No,
and the gunfights. Yeah.
Look, Terminator, hands down, had the coolest move, and I know most people don't even know about it. But now I'm going to tell you, and you're going to go back and watch it, and you're going to love it. The Uzi dip, okay? It's called the Uzi dip because there's a scene in the movie when he goes into the nightclub and he's after Sarah Connor and they're fighting. He's got a shotgun in one hand and an Uzi in the other, and he's like, "Goosh, goosh!" And then he takes the Uzi and he goes, "Brrr." It's the coolest scene in the movie. I tell you, Uzi dip is the bomb.
I don't think I've seen Terminator in its entirety, but I think I've seen that scene.
Yeah, exactly. So cool.
And Aliens is another example. Alien, the first one, is classic sci-fi horror. Aliens is classic horror adventure. Horror action adventure. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory, and I think that this is a genre that most people do in their sleep without knowing.
Yeah. Most definitely, because when you are running a whether it be like a sci-fi game that has action or whatever, or whatever, military game or whatever game you're running, usually there are some horror elements, whether you realize it or not, whether you be hiding from the enemy or like about to like unleash or uncover the main disastrous thing that's going on. Basically anytime there's like moments of tense or suspension, it could be considered horror.
Also, too, I just thought of this, but I think this is a genre out of the horror that allows the players to feel the most heroic.
Oh, yes.
And most players, people want to play heroic characters. A lot of these other genres, it's more surviving and controlling your fears. And this one, you actually get to fight back more.
Yes.
So I think this is more of a common horror game.
Most definitely.
I was going to say, I'll move on to the next. Dean, unless you want to say something about...
No, that's it. You got it.
Yeah. The last one would be Gore Fest. And what I mean by Gore Fest is gore for the sake of gore. Like a perfect example of this would be Brain Dead. Yes, Peter Jackson did films before he actually did Lord of the Rings, people. And Brain Dead is probably his greatest film to date. If you haven't seen it, it's just basically 1 hour and a half of blood splatter, gore, intestines flying. It's hilariously gross. It's a wonderful film. Check it out. I was a Peter Jackson fan way before King Kong and Lord of the Rings.
I don't know if I could particularly watch something like that, but
another one of his films was Bad Taste, so I also put that in there. And Basket Case, if you haven't seen that film, it's shocking and gross for the sake of being shocking and gross.
Exactly.
I put it in this category because I'm not so sure if this would make a great campaign, but for a one shot, it might actually be interesting to try. I'll be curious to see because it's sort of comedy and you can really go outlandish with your descriptions. Almost, I don't know, maybe horror and tune mixed together would kind of fit into this category. And I was planning, I wrote a little side note when I was writing this is talk to Dean about coming up with some descriptors and rules for this because I think this is something that we could actually play in a one shot and it'll be pretty interesting to do.
Well, yeah, and there are other films that could fall into that category that you kind of miss, like Toxic Avenger. Even though it's a comedy, it's definitely
absolutely
horror.
Yeah, Toxic Avenger definitely fit in this category.
What is it? Cannibal Holocaust from the 80s. Oh God, Tokyo Gore Police is definitely you. It's
Yeah,
right in the title. You
yeah.
know, um,
Anything by Trauma Film
yeah,
Company.
drama films. Yeah,
Yeah,
but there are and that's another thing we can actually point you to different studios too, because like Full Moon made a lot of movies
yeah.
in the 90s that were pretty doggone good, but they were mostly horror movies.
Straight to video.
Yeah, watched a lot of those movies on Joe Bob's drive-in on the movie channel.
I don't even know what that is.
All
Yeah,
right,
it's
so
before your time, Al.
I guess that covers my 4 categories of horror genre. Once again, if you disagree, that's awesome. Let us know because maybe we'll adjust it. But I think this was actually we kind of covered most of general basics of horror, the different genres, the different subgenres. Some of them might be good for games. Some others might not be so much. But I thought we'll at least talk about them.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
Aladdin, what's the next step now that we covered all the genres?
Dean?
Basically, I think we're gonna hit the tips, for running a good horror game.
Yeah, most definitely.
And go ahead,
I
Al.
mean, no, I mean, we already touched on the first aspect of it. What a very, very valuable tip for running a horror game. It doesn't even have to deal with actually running the game itself. It's preparing that session zero or having that discussion about what's going to happen in your game. People coming to a horror game, they're probably going to be a little more flexible about what they're okay with because, again, horror is meant to push boundaries. But again, that session zero, or even not a full blown session zero, maybe call it session, half zero, I don't know, where you just have like a 10-minute discussion with everybody about what's going to happen, what you would like to not see in detail, blah, blah, blah. And that's extremely vital in a horror game because the last thing you want to happen, because again, we play these games for fun. We don't play them, to have a bad time or a bad experience. So the last thing you'd want during one of your horror games is to overstep a boundary that wasn't expected or discussed beforehand. That's not to say as the GM that you have to divulge all your secrets of your game. Just let them know generally what's going to happen. Hey, there's going to be gore. Hey, there's going to be kidnapping. Hey, there's going to be blah, 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 whatever have you. Even as a GM, you should not be worried about, like, hey, I'm spoiling my secrets by saying there's going to be kidnapping or whatever. Because the players still don't know when that's going to happen, the context of it happening. They're just going to know that it's a theme that's going to play a role at some point. It might not even be a major point, so there's no real reason to hide your secrets.
I think this is what the consent form is meant for. We just spent about an hour talking about 25 different variations of what a horror game could be. So everyone has a different idea in their head or a different perspective of what to expect from a horror game. So Al's absolutely right. This is where you have the discussion of consent prior to play. This is the genre that absolutely needs a consent discussion.
Well, just for, and to put it all in context, the consent form came because they were writing a horror setting. They were writing the toolkit for running horror games. And it turned into, a 9-page dissertation or 11-page dissertation for people to look at. And, I'll continue to say it. It is good to have that session zero. It is good to have that consent discussion, no matter what it is. Like Al said, if it's 10 minutes, just to say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about putting in the game. Is there anything that I should know? Anybody got some triggers that, would take away from the onus of what's going on here? Because you as a GM, especially in Cypher System, you gotta put your improvisational pants on. You need to learn to improv. That's important. That's an important aspect actually to any game, because no matter how crunchy the system or how free form, there are going to be points because your players are not going to do what you think. Everybody's different. So yeah, have that discussion.
But even if you're not that GM comfortable improving, isn't it good to have that discussion with your players? Like, hey, this is exactly the kind of game I'm going to run. So, you could find the players that want to play the specific game you want to run. Everyone's not meant to play together, and the biggest misconception I always feel about the consent form, or even having a discussion of consent, is that the GM has to kowtow to the player's wishes. You always have the option to find the right group for you as a GM.
Exactly.
Yep.
You know,
Both ways.
so it works both ways. You know, I mean, we're not going to get into this whole discussion because we've discussed it before, but the consent form was designed to speak in defense of the players because they don't normally get defended as much as GMs do. There's a ton of other publications that do that for GMs. It was written for the defense of the players and their feelings, and give them some sort of protection. But as a GM, you always have the option to say, hey, this is the kind of game I want to run, especially with horror. They'll understand, hey, I want to run a gritty zombie apocalyptic, and I no holds bar. I'm gonna have all the gore in the world. If you're not comfortable with that, we'll play next week something else. But this is a game I want to run, and that's okay too. That's okay. It's fine. And it's okay for players to enjoy that style of game.
And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I mean, you guys know that I like to dip my toes in that water every so often, so I'm not gonna,
Go
ahead.
The major takeaway, and this isn't just for disagreements on what you may or may not consent to in gaming. This just goes with life. Even if you guys have differing beliefs or ideas on what is acceptable or not acceptable in the game, it doesn't mean you can't still be friends. Like just because you can't play a certain type of game together doesn't mean you still can't be friends like afterwards, or like that it's going to affect your friendship in any way. It's just like if I'm being told, hey, by Dean and Anthony, like two really close friends of mine, if they said, hey, we're going to go watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre 4 in theaters, and 3 in IMAX 3D, I might be like, hey, I don't think I'd enjoy that, so I'm going to sit this one out. Like, we're not going to not be friends afterwards,
Right.
It's not like they're... And just change that to a game. They present a game to me that I'm not comfortable with. I just say, hey, I'm going to sit this one out. Or they could even just be like, yo, maybe you should sit this one out. Like, there's no hard feelings there. It's just you guys have different tastes on this very subjective thing.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good place to segue into our next tip. Engage the people's five senses. Horror games are about atmosphere. The gore and everything is nice, but truly, if you engage your senses, be descriptive when you're describing your scenes. There's a cold, clammy feeling, on your skin, or your mouth suddenly goes dry, things like that. There's a buzzing in the back of your head. You can't explain why you have this feeling, but something is just not right. These are the type of things you want to do. These are the type of elements you want to bring to the table when you're telling your story, because by engaging the person like that, you're setting the stage for the big reveal, and if it's a build up, at least if I'm going to run a hardcore, like a supernatural or possession or something, those are the type of things that you want to do. On the other side of the coin, if you're doing the comedy or the action or whatever, make it visceral. Make it that type of thing where, they're ready to jump on the motorcycle and, try to do a wheelie through the monster or something. But engage them. And I think that's the big thing.
What I was going to say was this, as a side note, that this is a general tool or tip for GMing in general. But the reason it's brought up in this situation for horror games is because, like Dean said, the atmosphere is what's really important. And you cultivate that atmosphere by describing all five senses. Because if you ever watch a horror movie or anything like that, you notice that it seems like not much is going on, but it's taking such a long time to happen. Like this is like just describing everything in great detail kind of creates that effect of there's that lingering moment of hey, there's like it's only a couple of seconds, but it feels like ages because of the suspense. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it's like perfect example is just describing. Hey, all of a sudden the room gets entirely quiet, and you feel a chill run across your body, and your hair on your arm starts to stand up, even if nothing happens in the scene, right? That creates a tension, like something will happen. When is it going to happen? Is it going to happen now? Is he
Exactly.
messing with me? You know, it's you know, being descriptive. You're right. You should be descriptive in all, no matter what game you run. But it's extremely important in horror games. If you want to, instill that fear in a player, or even if you want to rack up the tension, that's the way you do it. Is with
Well,
using the descriptive, and hitting the five senses is the easiest way to do that.
well, I think you said it the best in the sense that, yes, you want to be descriptive with other games, but in horror games, it's your tool. It's your tool to make it horrifying. That's how you make it scary. So that's really when you're running those games. Just like if you're running the action game and you got to make it visceral. That a lot of times that's where you'll use a description like, the creature swipes at you and you feel, you literally feel his fingers, flay through your hair, and then you see, strands of hair fall because he just literally he missed the top of your head, but he just sliced your hair. That's how sharp his claws were. Give those moments, man. Get into it. Because I think as a game master, this is a spot of passion that, for me, no matter what I'm doing, that's what I try to do. I try to be descriptive. I try to tell the grand story. I want you in the moment. So, you know, I think you should do that for yourself and your players because it's a great payoff at the end of the day.
Since you use tension about developing tension, I think the next tip is actually a great segue into it. Is use pace in the narrative to develop tension, and I guess what we mean by that is have those quiet moments in the middle of the chaos and drama, and then immediately jump into chaos and drama. You know what I mean? It's about the way you pace your story. It's about how the narrative flows that leads into it gradually gets worse. Like, for a zombie game, is they might see one or two zombies, escape one or two zombies, and they're relatively safe. But all of a sudden, the zombies start amassing into higher and higher numbers. Their food supply gets lower. As the game moves on, the situation gets worse and worse and worse. It doesn't start off horrible. It gradually moves to that horrible stage. And by moving in small little steps and having slight changes from scene to scene, it creates this gradual drama that also builds fear over the course of the game. So by the time you get to the last 2 hour of the game, everyone is tense, and you delivered that fear you were looking for.
Exactly.
Yep.
Sounds good. Yeah, pacing is and it's an important skill for other genres too.
Yeah.
Everything we're talking about is very good for whatever game you're running.
Yep.
You know,
and I will say this too: pacing is something that most GMs struggle with at first.
right.
No matter what game system you're playing, but once you start to get the hang of it, your games are going to change dramatically for the better.
Most
Right.
definitely. But I think that lets us go into the next Tip for running a good horror game, which I think I mentioned earlier in the video, which is the fear of the unknown and saving plot elements to be revealed during gameplay. So what that is what I was saying earlier is that you always keep that threat just ever so out of their range. They see like the remnants of the bad thing, or like they see like maybe a victim that already had its fate, or they find some broken environmental thing like brush, or furniture is broken, and that goes hand in hand with don't reveal everything right at the start. So with my Killer in the Woods teen game, they well, as soon as I advertised the game, I just said, hey, it's going to be Killer in the Woods, but they don't know where that killer is. They don't know what it is. They don't know if it's a person or a supernatural thing. And that all gets revealed through little things throughout the story, and then finally at the end they get the big reveal where the big bad comes out of the shadows, and they get the full view for the first time. And I believe that's a common thing used in a lot of horror movies or books or whatever have you, where the threat is just lingering. You never get a full look of it. Like you see just maybe the feet peeking out of some shadows, or just a silhouette against some dark backdrop or something. And then when everything culminates to the climax, it's finally revealed, like, hey, this is the thing that's been terrorizing you this whole time. And again, it makes for a great game.
I mean, I use another example of this is when I ran John Carpenter's The Thing. We randomly rolled someone to be affected at the beginning of the game, and they couldn't reveal it until I told them to. So they were having to play a character, they didn't know they were infected, and but they knew somebody was infected. So it was a way of, I had a big reveal without telling them anything. I just said, roll a number, somebody's going to be affected. So it automatically created the tension of everyone accusing the other one of being infected without actually knowing who was right or not.
And and another thing about revealing, plot elements through gameplay, or the fear of the unknown, that's the smoke and mirrors. That's the old shell game. Sometimes you can put the onus on, and Anthony did an excellent job in the Thing game by putting the onus on someone who wasn't infected, and everybody thinking this is the person, and just at the right moment when they're getting ready to murk an innocent person, the other guy is thinging out over in the corner, so these are things that you learn. Like this goes right along with pacing. Those go hand in hand. So, and it is, like he said, it's something that comes with time. It comes with experience, but don't fret because it's a small thing. Reality is you'll get better at it.
Yeah. It's not difficult to catch any of this stuff. It's just about, like any other thing in life, it's about repetition. If you keep on doing something enough times, you're going to get better at it.
Most definitely.
And basically, with that being said, that's an excellent idea for the next tip. Make death matter. Make it have consequences. And here's a cool way to do that in a horror game, especially if you're doing like a one-shot or something like that. I always have, more characters than necessary.
You read my mind, dude.
Well, you have more characters than necessary. But here's the other thing. The aspect is this. If a player character dies, trust me, somewhere along the line, there will be consequences because, prime example was in Anthony's zombie game. It was great because one of the player characters died, but he had the detonator switch, because we were going to blow something up. Well, the zombies got him. The detonator switch is gone. That was a hell of a consequence. His death mattered. We had to improvise. We had to come up with another way in order to set off the explosive. Luckily, somebody had an RPG, but it was those aspects, and what if that person that used the RPG earlier on in the game at the wrong moment? So that extra trigger would have been gone. What were we going to do then? So those are the type of things you think about whenever you're running a horror game. What are going to be the consequences of a player death? Even though you've got another character waiting in the wings so everybody can have fun and continue to have fun, what are the consequences of player one's death? versus player 4, or so on and so forth.
Or even if you want to go another route, if you want to go the emotional consequences, if you're playing a survival horror game like a slasher killer game, and one of the NPCs that were rolling with the party dies early in the game, what were the relationship of these player characters to that NPC? Because
Right.
In a lot of horror games, you're not playing heroes. You're playing normal people. And normal people, when someone dies, feel a certain way. They have a traumatic experience. It's not something. It's not like in a D&D game. You could, chop up a horde full of goblins and not think twice about it. When someone dies, you feel that. What's the emotional effect? What it makes your character? What it makes the group feel like? And those are questions that you should ask in game as the GM. Like, hey, you just lost your best friend. What is your character feeling? What's the emotional attachment to them?
Right. And you, oh, I'm sorry, Al, go ahead.
No. I was just gonna just talk about as not as heavy as the emotional toll, but like you guys said, make death matter and have consequences. So I'm gonna keep it rolling with the zombies or apocalypse example. Whereas if they don't protect certain NPCs, or if they make poor decisions, that it's not just for players, it involves NPCs as well. Their deaths should matter as well, not just for the emotional thing, but maybe it limits their resources. Like maybe the nurse dies, or maybe the guy who knows how to farm, he dies, or whatever have you, because of the player choices. They didn't protect him properly. Now there's less food, there's less medical aid to be provided, and again, it just helps create that sense of responsibility for protection. And again, it creates that tension of, I need to keep these people safe, or myself safe, or whatever have you, otherwise it's going to have an impact in some way if I die, or if one of the NPCs dies.
And the other thing I was going to add to that too is, you can also, this is Cypher System, so guess what, you could say, hey, your attachment, like Anthony's talking about, the emotional aspect, we could add a game mechanic to it. Mm-hmm. That was your wife, she died, so guess what, you're mentally hindered for the next couple of hours. You're in some state of shock.
Hours. I was saying like
hours,
days.
But
like...
I'm just saying, depending on if you're running.
Yeah, I go to.
But I'm just saying. So guess what? Yeah. You might have to take a hindrance on, on intellect rolls, or you might have to take a hindrance on, a speed defense or something like that, because you're just not focused anymore. So there's so many ways to handle it.
That's the perfect example of adding a consequence to death, to make it matter, to create that tension. I mean, you just nailed it, nailed the coffin, so to speak.
Yeah, but
that was perfect.
Yeah, again, it doesn't always have to be an atmospheric thing to add tension. It could be a mechanical thing, like Dean was just saying, where you witness something traumatic, and now this is also a good segue into the next part. But you see, again, your wife dies, or your close friend dies, so now for the next day or so, all your tasks are hindered because you just can't think straight. Like, that adds a mechanical tension. Like, now my character can't do anything right because he's too stressed about witnessing his friend die. And again, that's an excellent way to do it mechanically without changing your story or adding any this is an easy way. Like, let's say you find yourself not being too good with description or atmosphere, you can definitely add tension through mechanical means as well. And that again,
no, I was just gonna say that leads into Cypher System, the system we play. But Cypher System is actually well designed to handle horror, well designed to handle almost all the subgenres that we spoke of today. And one of the major reasons why is horror mode. Dean, do you want to walk us through horror mode?
Sure. Horror mode is literally. Because I did. Funny enough that you said it. I actually opened the book up to go over the optional rules that we're going to talk about. Horror mode is a method that Cypher System uses to ramp up that tension, like we were talking about. So normally in the game, if you roll a 1 on a 20-sided die, that gives the GM a free intrusion. And that's like, easy enough. You get a free intrusion on a 1. Well, in horror mode, when you roll a 1, then that automatically moves it to the next number up. So when you roll a 1 and 2, so if you roll a 1 or 2, guess what? Now GM gets another free intrusion. If you roll a 1, 2, or 3 after that, and so on, and you can cap your horror mode at whatever level you want. You could say, up to 10 is my horror mode, or you can just let it ride. So that means even though you complete your task, GM still gets an intrusion, And again, I'm going to go back to Anthony's horror game because it was so well done in that manner. We were playing and horror mode got up to like 11 or 12. And it was crazy because, you know what? We're trying to get away from the zombies, but the horde is coming. And Patrick Stewart was leading the horde. And it was really messed up because, we were rolling. And so I think I rolled the 4, and that's when we went to 1 to 5. And I remember, because it was on my character, I was a trivia buff. Mm-hmm. And when I realized Patrick Stewart was a zombie, that was his intrusion on me, was that my character got visibly shaken, And so, for the next, couple of rounds, I was hindered on all actions that involved me moving because I was just messed up in the head because Patrick Stewart, so little stuff like that. So your horror mode is a really great way to ramp up the tension, and you don't have to do crazy killer things to your players, just stuff to tweak their situations.
And GM intrusions, like just intrusions in general, is what separates Cypher System from all other gaming systems, in my opinion. It's other systems have narrative control mechanics, but not in the way Cypher System does for the player and the GM to be able to change the narrative on the spot. So with horror games, adding that fear element, adding that shock element, GM intrusions are your best friend. Like, there's just the example with horror mode, chances are once it gets to 4 or 5 on a, if you have 4 players rolling a D20, a 5 on a D, 1 to 5 on a D20, chances are at least once around you're going to get to change the narrative.
Yep. And that becomes
and just those slight changes ramps up the tension. And just the fact that every time someone rolls, they might have a GM intrusion coming their way, ramps up the tension. So, the mechanics itself builds fear, and it builds excitement as the GM. Like, oh man, I know this person's Dean's been rolling nothing but 4s and 5s all night,
And another thing is, it lets you really helps you with the pacing control, because on top of this is kind of when stuff is going down, is when horror mode gets activated. But just like with any story, there's times where the stuff is past you. You're settling down. You tell the players, hey, there's no more horror mode, and they know, hey, it's now it's time to relax. And it really gives you control of that, like very direct control of the pacing and the tension. Because once horror mode, you tell them, hey, horror mode is active, they instantly know, stuff is going down. And then when you tell them, hey, horror mode is now off, there's that wave of relief, like, ooh, we get that relief. That having that back and forth is really makes the horror genre so impactful, is that you have that time of safety, and then you never know when it's going to switch to that horror.
Right. So.
And we use horror mode for not only horror games, but that's for another video.
So moving on to the next optional rule, Anthony, you gonna talk about that one? Shock.
Hold on 1 second. I'm just re-looking just to make sure that I have it correctly.
I mean, I could spitball real fast what I think it is, and you could correct me.
Oh no, I have it here.
All right.
But there's different levels to. You could create your own shock table for pretty much any genre, but it's a normal person not seeing something that they normally would normally see. Like if you a normal person seeing a dead body for the first time, and they roll an intellect roll based on that, and if they're shocked, they become either frozen in fear. There's various different right? That's basically it, right?
Yeah, it's either
Yeah, well,
you.
basically what
Yeah.
it does is shock rules can be handled. The way it's set up is they can be handled in various ways.
Intellect
If you
defense rolls,
Right.
though.
Well,
Yes.
intellect defense rolls, you might suffer intellect damage from taking too much shock based on the level of the creature that you're dealing with. Or you could actually have a little more fun with it if a person fails a shock roll and they stand there in abject horror. You as the GM get to take control of their character for a round. So you can have them run away screaming. You could have them stand in the corner gibbering. You can have them just be slack jawed, So you have a lot of options with the shock rules, but they're flexible, which I like. So it's like within
Yeah,
that.
I think shot goes hand in hand with the madness rules.
Right.
Like I could definitely see this for Cthulhu style game where, it is a lot of the psychological horror, and you could, frozen in fear and take intellect damage. To be honest, I've used shock rules, but I've never used it on damage. I always used it as you failed your shock roll, you lose your turn. You know, I know when I read it, I knew it did intellect damage, but I've never done it that way. I usually have the person lose their turn or can't do an action or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the beauty of Cypher System. There's just so many ways to handle a thing. Like, just because it's written in the book that they have to take intellect damage or however it's written, doesn't necessarily have to be that way. You can tailor
but it
to-
absolutely works for psychological
Oh, yeah,
horror.
no, most definitely.
And I could definitely see running a Cthulhu game where, you just draining them for intellect damage all day long. So,
Yep.
So yeah, that which is great, moving us into madness. I like the way the madness rules are set up actually, because the madness rules basically state that if a person ever reach their intellect pool in your game reaches zero in madness, then they go mad. Your descriptor changes to the mad descriptor. You regain a d6 +1 to your intellect pool, and you get a +1 to your intellect edge, which is awesome. But then the cool part is if you ever reach zero again in intellect, you are stark raving mad. You're gone, and your character is completely unplayable.
Yeah, you
essentially
die.
Right, and so it's a lot of fun. So you can actually make, you can actually have so much fun with the madness rules, and as you can also do levels to your madness. You don't necessarily. You could say if they lose half their pool, guess what? This is the caveat. This is what happens with their character. If they lose 3/4 of their pool, this is what happens, and then of course you go mad.
and for one shot and for or even for a campaign, you see that a lot in horror movies where just all these horrible things are happening and the characters gradually changing and get for the worse, and their sanity is slowly slipping away from them, and towards the end of the game it's either I survive this or I'm gonna be stark raving mad, and that's definitely something interesting to as a player to experience that and to see how your character reacts and grows over time, and as a GM to be able to add that to the narrative is something that I would look forward to, especially in horror games.
And for people out there who can't kind of conceive of the whole madness thing or the levels of madness, I'll give you an example. If you take Predator, prime example, Bill Duke's character in the first movie, when he had me some fun, he starts taking off his gear, and he's unhinged, and he just goes into this mode, just before he dies, of course. But he went away from all of his training and everything else, and kind of just went into this this insane craze mode, and you see it in so many different movies. So think about the movies that you see the character.
I have a perfect example. Dawn of the Dead. I mean, Day of the Dead, which is one of my favorite movies.
Yeah, Day of the Dead. Yeah.
He at the end of the movie, one of the major characters let all the zombies in because he just couldn't take it anymore. He couldn't take
The isolation is
the isolation. So he went mad to the point where he didn't care about his friends. He said, "You know what? I'm just gonna let all the zombies kill us all and end it all." He made that decision for them.
Oh, jeez.
and I mean, but it happens in so many movies, you know. And what I find interesting is that when you watch the movies as well, um, nobody seems to notice that the person is going, you know, because everybody else's tension is so amped up, they're not paying attention to the telltale signs.
But that goes back to the pacing and
Exactly.
Revealing at the
exactly.
Revealing.
So
you could even have people make madness rolls in secret.
Well, that's what I was just getting ready to say. Make the madness roll in secret, you know, and you know, send a ninja note. You know, that's where you tell the player, you know, hey, listen, this is what's going on with you, you know, and to play it out, you know, but keep that between you and the GM.
This might be. I know we did a video on like etiquette, I believe, in the gaming table, online and offline. Online, it's very easy to send a secret message. Just shoot them a message on Discord or something like that. This might be the exception to the rule where we said when you're in a real life game, there's no phones. If you're having a situation in your games where you need to like pass around some secret information or have secret dice rolls, this would be a perfect opportunity. You just tell a player, hey, I message them like, hey, did you do it really fast so you don't break the flow?
I mean, with me, I think prior to the game, I would just take a piece of paper and just write what the madness effects are, not knowing who the person is. Because typing sitting there is just, that's going to take too long.
Well, I type fast. I don't know.
I'll be over there like grandpa typing. A-C. You know, but I would just take a piece of paper and have them like.
That makes sense too. It's a little more preparation.
Like I said, it's a little preparation, but we used to do it all the time, you know. That's when Post-its became our friend. Yeah. You know? we called them ninja notes. We take, you know, got the ones that weren't sticky on the back, and you just, you know, write your note, fold it up. And what I did at my table, which was really cool, well, I thought it was cool, and everybody else said it was cool. I just had a little basket, okay, and people would write their notes and throw them in a basket, you know. And you know, if it was important for the scene, I had stuff color coded. If I knew it was going to be like immediately for that scene, you know, you wrote it on a red Post-it. And if it was, you know, something that I could get to later, it was on a green Post-it or a white Post-it, you know. And it was just really cool like that because, you know, that was how we did it, you know. And then if I was passing those to them, mine were like always on blue paper or something, you know, just ways to keep your game going. And, you know, I can write and talk to you and keep the game going easier than I could probably type on my phone. I mean, I'm not You're a millennial. You're a millennial. You can do that.
Yeah, me too. I'd rather just have notes and hand them. But I'll be grandpa in it.
But yeah, you know, all these rules again, like I said before, they're mechanical ways. Just to loop back to what we're talking about, the optional rules. They're mechanical ways for you to ramp up tension. So you don't have to be the best, amazing storyteller, because these rules can help you ramp up tension without necessarily. I mean, you're definitely going to want to work on your descriptions and your pacing and all that stuff. But these are ways to in-game ramp up that tension. So you can still play a horror game even though you might not necessarily be the best horror storyteller.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, they all absolutely are tools to help you ramp up the tension without having the, like exactly what you said, the GM chops.
So, and I guess, you know, that's about everything. So we can do our closing remarks.
I mean, the one thing we have multiple questions about, we hit we already like an hour and a half in, but there's one question I think we should definitely talk about is what's the difference between, before we even close out, is a horror campaign and a horror one shot. Just one question I think we should definitely at least give our opinions on.
For me, a horror campaign, that's going to be a long running, that's probably going to be, and it's probably going to be one of the more intricate things that you would run, but it's going to be a long running journey, if you will, to, you know, and possibly, you know, maybe not an Apex ending. It might be TPK, you know, you know, it might, but it's a long journey. It's a journey. A one shot is a flash in the pants. You know what? It's that, it's that episode, it's that double episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or it's, like the movies we're talking about, it's Alien, it's, you know, Suspiria, whatever, Um, so that's what I look at. So basically, a campaign is a TV series, and a one shot is a movie.
I mean, you basically just described that for every kind of one-shot campaign. But what I was gonna say was that the biggest difference in my mind, even though I've never run a horror campaign, just a horror one-shot and played in some horror one-shots, is that in a horror campaign, I feel like the players need to be in immediate danger, and the danger needs to be an actual threat, but it needs to be a manageable threat, because in the campaign it would be kind of shitty, for a lack of a better word, that you're playing this character for 6, 7, 8 sessions and then suddenly they're just gone. In this situation in a campaign, I feel like lasting injuries.
Unless you play in a Cthulhu game.
Oh yeah. That's a different story. Yeah. But in these situations where the character, or excuse me, the players want to keep playing the same characters, it goes back to what we were saying about like the shock rules and the madness rules. They're going to change over time. So you give them lasting injuries. It's more about their transformation as a person through these events, not actually killing them. Whereas in a one-shot, killing them left and right doesn't really matter. You have characters on deck, whatever, they can hop back in. But it can also be played either way, though. One-shot could be more, you can see a transformation over the course of the 4 hours. But campaigns definitely lend itself more to that. And again, one-shots lend itself more to that action-packed style of horror game.
I think with horror campaigns, I think that you build the fear and the suspense gradually over the course of many sessions. And similar, I kind of agree with what you said, Al, is the major, antagonist, the major villain doesn't get revealed in the first 2 or 3 sessions. What builds up the suspense is finding the clues that leads to that, epiphany of, oh, this is truly the evil source, right? With a one-shot, you're there to punch them in the face in the middle of the game. like the shock and the horror has to like, it's more smoke and mirrors. It's more I'm going to show you this graphic thing in the middle of this game that's going to shock you to say, oh man, this is serious. And then you start building the tension quickly towards the end. You have more time in a campaign, so you're going to build this, like you could actually touch multiple genres of horror in a campaign, but with a one shot, you got to stick to, okay, I'm doing a psychological, slasher film. So those are the elements you have to put in and concentrate on those elements and make sure to have a shocking scene. You can't play around so much with the narrative in a one shot. In a one shot is I'm gonna have to drop the fear in fast and heavy by midpoint of this game, and I gotta make the pace, pick up the pace. With a campaign is you could take your time. You could be the tortoise running, but in a one shot you got to be that rabbit of I'm hitting my points. By 1 hour in, I have to have this sort of this part in the narrative. Midway point in the narrative, I have to have a big shocking moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Pacing definitely becomes, but that goes for any genre. It becomes much more important in a one shot versus where a campaign where you could take your time building all that suspense.
Right. Everything goes in cycles. Like I said, most of the time I've run a few horror campaigns, but most of the time, and that's something else, and it's just me personally, I normally set an idea or a time limit. I truly look at my horror campaigns as if they're, like a series, and I might tell people, hey, guess what? There's going to be 23 episodes, just like a season of television. There's going to be 23 episodes, and we're going to tell the story, within that. If we need a couple more at the end, okay, fine. But I'm shooting for 23.
Yeah, horror runs its course. You're absolutely right. Could get stale real quick.
Right.
Like
So
horror is one of those genres that like you like 9 sessions in, and you be like, "What do you mean we haven't seen this alien yet?"
right, and
Been all
and
over
I'll
this
be honest because
space station.
I'm very guilty. I was Johnny on the spot, and the reason why I started doing it was because of The Walking Dead. I realized that what, I have to make this work, because after the third season, I just couldn't bring myself to watch another episode. I have not seen. I don't know what happened at the ending. I don't care. It was enough was enough.
I read the comics, so
But that's the other thing. I read the comics and enjoyed the comics. The comics
are
did
different.
something.
Yeah, they're different.
The comics did
Definitely.
something special that the TV show lost me, like I said, after like the end of the third season.
But
So,
yeah, I think we've basically hit on everything. Any
so
final thoughts, guys?
my only final thought with this, is what, take this all in, and learn what you need to, but at the end of the day, have fun.
It's always about that fun.
Yep.
Anthony?
My last bit of advice is if you go into it thinking that you have to scare the players, it won't happen. Just go into it saying, "Hey, look, I got this good story. It scares me and evokes an emotion in me when I think about this story, and if you're true to that, then it's going to translate to the players."
Most definitely.
But if you go in thinking I have to make everybody scared or I have to shock them, it's chances are it's not going to happen.
And
Exactly.
for me, as someone who doesn't dip into the horror genre as much as these two guys, my closing thoughts would be, if you are hesitant about horror, if it's not your biggest cup of tea or whatever, still try to play in one. They can be very fun. Again, there's always, if you're again have any triggers or things that might set you off in a bad way, it's always good to have that talk with the GM to make sure that the game is appropriate for you. But horror games can be even the most tame ones. I feel like mine is not the most extreme horror, minus a couple of scenes here and there, and it can still be very fun. Like honestly, the majority of my game is just them running away. Like honestly, like there's no actual graphic anything, and even those scenes are. I mean, I felt like they were fun to run. And again, horror doesn't have to be high end scare all the time, like graphic stuff happening constantly. So even if horror isn't normally your cup of tea, there is a horror game out there for you to play.
And I just want to add to that too. Everybody remember this too. And we touched on it, but we didn't go into super detail. But horror is another one of those that can cross genres. There's horror sci-fi, there's horror comedy. You can have a horror romance story. There's so much out there. There's a plethora of things to choose from to kind of get your feet wet. So if you're not a horror person, like Al was saying, you know what? Don't try to run pure horror. Don't try to run a straight horror. Dip into something that you know already, but just throw a slant on it. That's all.
Yep. Definitely good practice if you're not comfortable running a full blown horror game. Just have a horror scene in a normal action or whatever kind of game you're running, and that most likely will get you prepared for running a full.
One last thing before you close this out. If there's a horror genre that we miss, please put it in the comment section down below, because I'm pretty sure we missed a couple of major ones. So, let us know where we effed up.
Yeah, most definitely. I'm sure these two will appreciate being schooled on a topic they know so.
Oh, there's certain movies or books that we forgot to mention
That you felt should have been mentioned, yes.
Yep. Let us
Definitely,
know.
yeah. Write that down below.
Yep.
Let us know how any of your horror games go. Your favorite horror game you've run went. I'm sure there's plenty of nice stories to give people inspiration out there.
Yep.
But
And did I say one more thing?
yes.
The only reason I'm bringing it up is because I'm getting my feet wet on Twitch, people. I'm going to be running a Twitch game on Saturday, and it's going to be for Halloween, so it's going to have a horror element to it. It's going to have a sci-fi element to it. Come one, come all, join us. You know, we'll be on
Correction.
Twitch.
We will be running a Twitch
Yeah.
game. Cypher Unlimited.
I mean,
Well, Cypher Unlimited, I'm the GM. Excuse me, but I'm the GM. So, you know, these guys will be there.
Dean and these other guys. Oh yeah, you be there too. You be there too.
so, just for clarification, the Cypher Unlimited crew is running a space-themed sci-fi horror game with Dean as the GM on October 26th at 9:30 Eastern Time. I believe it's 1:30 Universal time. I forget what the UTC stands for.
Yeah, 4 hours.
I think it's UCT is United Coordinated Time. But either way, we'll be running that on the Cypher Unlimited Twitch. It'll be linked down below. Be sure to give us a follow so you get a notification as to when we go live. But yeah, it should be a good time. It's going to be all of us, not just us three, but also our mods from the server, the golden ones, which will be Char, Spangled Maker, and Haplo, if you know them from the Discord server.
Also, if for whatever reason you can't make it to the Twitch stream the following week, the same game will be posted on our YouTube channel as well.
Yep. So again, be sure to
Oh, actually, it'll be posted. Dean's gonna post it by himself off a banner.
but be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as per our usual request, so you can get notified. Hit that little bell so that when we do post that game, if you missed it, you can watch it. Be sure to like our video, share it around, show your friends. And again, be sure to leave a comment down below. Let us know how your horror games have gone. Any horror movies we missed. Any topics you want to see us touch. Let us know down below. And we appreciate all ideas thrown our way. Because again, we love making videos for you guys. So again, be sure to let us know. Yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Again, hit that little notification bell to know us when we go live. Like, share, subscribe. Yeah, from us at the CU, we will see you later.